Oh, here it is.
And then see how that's moving? That tells
Yep.
me it's live.
Okay.
And then
it's-
short press it, or let's see, short press it. Press will put it back on live.
Okay, on live now.
Yeah, you're live. See, it's moving. Okay. Let me see if I hear it in my. Let me see if make sure I hear it in my.
Okay, now we're back on. Okay, I'm talking to the famous Dr. Oz about I have no idea what.
You're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Matt, does this work? Matt, can you hear me? Okay. Should we go? Okay. Good evening. Welcome, everybody. We will get a fantastic turnout tonight. Looks like we're almost out of chairs. That's a good sign to see. Welcome, everybody. So my name is Paul Ehrlich. I am the president of the Minnesota Woodworkers Guild. We are a volunteer organization of about 850 members. We've been around since, I can't tell you how long. It's been a long time, much, much longer than I've been involved with the organization. We do a number of events every year. That includes our monthly programs, and I'll talk some more about that in a minute. But we have two big here that are really exciting events, and one of these is coming up just imminently. In fact, everybody should be, like me, busy back at your shop, wondering what the heck you're going to do about Northern Woods. Northern Woods is a fantastic event. It's held at the Eden Prairie Center. We get typically 50 to 75 pieces that are submitted of spectacular quality. It's going to be at Eden Prairie Center on April 23rd to the 26th. If you're planning on participating this year, the deadline to sign up to enter is the 15th of April. It is possible to enter after that, but it's just a really bad idea. It kind of messes everything up, and nothing's impossible, but it's not a great idea. Polk reminds me that we also, like everything we do, we rely entirely on volunteers, and running Northern Woods is a giant volunteer effort. You know, that we need people at the booth all the time. We need people to help with setup. We need people to help with teardown. It's just a giant Herculean effort. So we need more volunteers, and if you're interested, you can sign up on the website to volunteer, or you can talk to Polk if you have any questions about it. Our other big event is our annual Northern Woods Expo, which is held in October every year. For this year, we've just signed our contract with the State Fairgrounds to be back for the third year in a row. It's a little bit later this year because Labor Day is a little bit later this year, so the fair is a little bit later this year. So we're mid-October, 13th, 15th, 16th. 16th. Well, I'm sorry. And the other big announcement is that we are going to be trying something new this year with Expo. It's traditionally been a one-day event, which should be on Saturday the 17th. We are working, and keep your eyes peeled for an announcement on this, on a special event that will be that Friday night. And that's all I'm going to tell you right now. It's a secret.
What's the date again?
The date is October 17th
Okay.
at the Progress Building in the State Fair, at the State Fair.
Make it this year.
Our other big program is our education program, which is an up-and-coming program. We traditionally had done a fall seminar once a year, or we brought in somebody to do a two-day lecture. We're now moving to a hands-on education program, and we are just finishing our first class. Tomorrow night is the last time. It's actually an online class on digital design, but we have other classes planned, and we just came out of a strategic planning session, actually a whole series of things planned on the area of education. And Chrislyn Goodman, who's standing in the back, is our education coordinator, and we're so grateful to her for all of her guidance and support in making that happen. Do these monthly programs. Our program tonight should be great. Because we have Northern Woods next month, we will not have an April program, but in May, we will be back in this room, and we will have two different pieces to the program. One is that we will have the winners from Northern Woods who agree to come and speak about their pieces to talk, and then we will have our scholarship winners. Every year we award, traditionally every year we have awarded 2 scholarships for members that would like to go and do a national training program at some point. This year we actually had a 3rd winner because due to the generosity of Mark Laub, who has donated a 3rd scholarship. So we will have our 3 scholarship winners having an opportunity to present on what they learned, and that'll be really exciting. We just actually came out of a 2-hour-long meeting with our board, and I'm not going to introduce all of you, but all the board members that are in the room, Carl, George, Ron, yes, Norbert, Chrislyn. The board is doing something new this year, which we had not done in the past, which is that we're actually, one of the challenges we have as a board is we meet every month, hours at a time every month, and we just deal with the business of the guild. It's just a ton of stuff we have to deal with, financial stuff, business stuff, member stuff. we never spend a lot of time talking about where we're going or what we're doing. So we're doing a new project this year to actually build a strategic plan and to start to do some strategic planning. And we're actually working on a draft of a 3-year plan right now for where we're going as an organization. And it's really exciting, and we're just starting to figure it out, but I will share as much of that with you as I can as that proceeds. So it's a really exciting thing to do. One of the things, though, that has come up and comes up all the time, it came up in the strategic planning process, but it comes up in every discussion we have, is as an organization, we are a volunteer organization, and we only can do as much as our volunteers can do. And I need a couple of new volunteers. I need a couple of new volunteers on our board. I have a couple of board members who, after many, many, many years, are moving on and wanting to do different things. So we need people to help with programs. I need people to help with volunteering. I've got a couple of other potential open and new roles. So I'm looking for people to join different committees, and I'm looking for people to join the board. And if you're interested, come up and see me, or you can email me at president@mnwwg.org. One of the things that we started trying to figure out how to do about a year ago was help out folks sometimes that have, due to various different reasons, have shops full of stuff that they need to get rid of and pass on to a new home. And Stu Fox had volunteered to help us with that. And Stu, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of where you're at?
Yeah.
I'll let you talk into
I
this for the people that are online.
I think it was about maybe a year and a half ago or something, Ed New had mentioned that the Guild would be contacted by people looking for people to buy shop equipment. And so in the last year and a quarter, I've actually been working with 4 different people. One person we took all our equipment to an auction house, and she was able to dispose of it that way. Another person, we had a local estate sale. Right now I'm working with somebody up in Park Rapids and also somebody in Duluth. And obviously I'm not traveling up there to look at their equipment, so we've been communicating via email. But what I want to point out is when I find these out, I post them on the Guild site.
Classifieds.
Yeah,
Classifieds.
the classified ads. So if you know anybody that's up in the Park Rapids area, there was a fellow who just passed away. His brother is doing the estate. He was a professional cabinet maker. So they have a lot of older equipment. So if you're looking at old Powermatic or other types of things, take a look at the website. His contact information's on there. The other person is a widow who lives in Duluth. Her husband was a hobbyist. He built toys and all other types of things. And I just spoke with her this afternoon, and she's connected with an auction house. So if you know anybody up in the Duluth area that's looking, that's familiar with auction houses, look on the auction sites. You might be able to pick up some of their equipment that way. So if you have any questions about contacting these 2 people, I've got their contact information. You can stop and talk to me.
Thanks. And I saw the list for the Powermatic stuff. It's pretty nice in Park Rapids. We're going to try something new tonight. I usually ask new members to stand up and introduce themselves, but we're going to try something a little bit different. Many of you may have done this in church before. So we're just going to take a couple minutes here. I'd like you to turn to the person next to you, introduce yourself, and I'd like you to talk for the next 2 minutes about what you're currently working on in the shop. So just a chance. So.
And what are you doing there, Paul?
I'm trying to get my Northern Woods project ready, Tom. If it gets good enough, and it's a credenza, so it's a.
So I pulled out a sheet of plywood to start making the pedestal for my piece today.
Oh yeah.
Guess what? Not enough wood.
Oh yeah. I hate making that pedestal. It's always the last thing I do.
You know, in fact, maybe you know this. I know this is all kind of newish to you, Paul.
Yeah.
But is there any kind of way that somebody who wants to enter can find a pedestal from a previous year and have a pedestal exchange of some sort?
That's a great idea. That's a really good idea.
There must be dozens of pedestals that are sitting in people's attics.
I have a stack of them.
Oh, very.
Because I thought I'm just going to keep these, and I'm going to try and reuse them.
I would rather just pass it on to somebody else.
Because my first one was round,
Really?
because I did a lamp and I just did a round pedestal, and I thought, well, that was kind of clever.
Right.
So yeah, the next one was kind of, you know, so I'm trying to, I have a separate spot to keep all my old pedestals. Yeah.
So anyway, it's something in the classifieds or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But I think it needs a prompt, if you know what I mean.
There's also debate going on about building new vitrines this year.
Well,
so.
pain in the butt, but yeah.
Yeah.
What would be different? They just need repainting, right?
No, I think they want a taller one or something. But it's like,
I mean, more or different?
well, I don't know. I got this note saying, do you have any money for it?
I was
It's
going to
like,
say those
well, I don't
plastic
know.
tops are probably
Expensive.
pretty spendy.
I didn't get an answer for how much they wanted, so it's kind of on hold. All right. Good, people are talking.
Yeah, it worked. Good. Yeah, there's a lot of faces here. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a good turnout. You said people must like you.
I've been around.
We'll give them another minute. They're doing great.
So how is your tenure as pres going?
Good. It's time consuming.
So you did this before at a different organization, is that right?
I was involved with another guild. I was involved with the Portland, Oregon Guild. Yeah, I was their planning director. And I ran shop operations for a while with them. Different
They
organization.
had no, too.
Different organization.
Well, I hope your 3-year plan or your strategic sessions include discussion of going that route, of having a workshop.
Strange, but it does.
I have been pushing this for years.
It's in year 3, but it's in the plan.
And the guy you got to talk to about that is Mark.
Well, I'm having dinner with Mark next
We
week.
need a patron.
Mark's already stepped forward. Mark's already stepped forward.
He and somebody else, they just got to
Yeah.
pony up.
Mark's already offered to do that.
That's got to be the way it works.
That's one of the things that drove the plan is when Mark stepped forward, and I said, Mark, you obviously have a plan. We need to have one too. Okay.
Every Northern Wood Show for the last 12 years or so, I've talked to as many people as I can at the banquet about this dilemma and how to solve it. And I just kept saying, you have to take the organization to a completely different level.
But we got to water.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many other people in the cities that have done similar things, the weavers, the potters, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Can't happen.
All right. Well, it's good. It's good to see that nobody had anything to say to their neighbors. If I can get everybody's attention again, please. Thank you. All right. We can keep talking, but it's a little unfair to Tom, who's come to present tonight. So, I'd like to introduce Tom Caspar. Tom is going to talk about. Tom is a long-standing person involved with the Guild. I'm told you're actually one of the founders of the Guild back in 1907, or whatever year it was that it started. I'm a little bit vague on the dates. 79. Well, the challenge is that there's actually this is a little bit of Guild trivia for you. There's both a Guild start date and then there's a Guild incorporation date, which occurred 20 years after each other. So the Guild was formally incorporated, I think, in 1993 or 1997, but it existed for a long time before that. So we should document the history a little bit better. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tom. Tom is going to talk tonight about Art of the Gray, and I don't have a long intro for you, Tom, but I know you're going to do it yourself. So.
That's right. Well, so first I got to turn this on and see if it's working. Oh, we went. Well, the switch can mute on and off. That's the deal.
Okay.
So we're unmuted. So everything I say is going out to the large world Well, welcome everybody. There's a lot of familiar faces out there and a lot of people I haven't met yet, but probably will at some point in the future. So a little bit about myself. I've been a woodworker all my career. I started though only in my mid-20s. I apprenticed at a shop here in Minneapolis. And it was a tough apprenticeship. I didn't receive knowledge the way you might think apprentices normally do. In America, apprentices work more like this. You're thrown into a working shop. You're told, this is what we got to do today. Here's how you do it. See you later, kid. No education, no background, no general knowledge, no nothing like that. And you just have to, it's up to you kind of to piece this all together, which is a hard way to learn stuff, but especially if you're self-taught, like I'm sure a lot of you guys are, you're still kind of trying to connect some dots. And every once in a while a light bulb goes off and you go say, oh, I didn't know that. It's easier these days with so much information out there, but it's still a bit of a mystery. Anyway, I've been working wood since, well, since the founding of the Guild, about the same year more or less. That's when I went to work in that old-time shop. And since then I've been self-employed as a furniture maker. I worked as an editor at a woodworking magazine for over 15 years. And now I am an instructor at my home shop. I have private students who come for one-on-one lessons. And that to me is a terrific place to be at this point of my career and my age, having other people around. And the point is, why they come at least, is that they get to ask a bazillion questions, which you can't do usually in a setting like this. So I've become, through my building and writing, I was in the explaining business, so to speak, and now in dealing with students, I've had to answer questions about just about everything, and it seems like I know most of the answers, but I don't want to be too crazy about that. So anyway, tonight though, we're going to talk about something we all know, wood. I mean, duh. But I want to assume that some of you here, and I won't point any fingers, don't know much about this, even though you think you might. So some of you have been around the block a number of times when it comes to working with wood, and you probably are really familiar with all of the things I'm going to talk about. So if that's true, just bear with me. We're going to start out really broad and simple and deeper into the weeds as we go. Is that okay? Yeah. I learned I taught a course in hand tools at the local woodcraft store for over 25 years. And I always began that course with the same kind of introduction, meaning I know some of you know some of this stuff, some of you don't know it. We're all guys who pretend we know everything, right? No one's going to admit to being a beginner. I also found that out. We're all intermediates. So, so I said, don't worry, if you think you know it, the next guy next to you, just pretend that he doesn't. And it's always true that somebody was, needed it, the information from the very beginning. So speaking at the very beginning, where I want to start with this is just to tell you a little bit about how this is going to get set up. I really wasn't familiar with what our arrangement here is, but we'll make it work. I've got a whole bunch of really crude drawings. This would have been, by the way, a terrific PowerPoint presentation. But I thought to myself, oh God, you guys have probably sat through a million of these things and I don't want you to fall asleep. So we'll do it kind of an old analog way. Hand-drawn pictures, okay? A whole lot of wood props that I'm going to go and pick up, and if we need to see detail on them, there is a camera right here aimed at the table, so you guys can see it better. So I don't know if this is going to be visible to those of you in the back row or not, and I thought that that camera might help, but it really won't, and that camera won't help, so I'll just have to kind of pick this up or something like that. I don't know. We'll make it work, guys, somehow. Anyway, I want to start out with a really simple question, and that is, what the heck is grain? That's really what I want to talk about tonight. So I want to give two examples of things, conversations or phrases that you've heard a million times. One is that you might go up to a project or something like that and say, well, I really like the grain of that wood. Okay, sound familiar? But you also might say, in talking to somebody else in a different situation, you know, that I was always told by my shop teacher back in junior high that when I'm working with wood, planing it or whatever it is, I have to work, you can fill in the blanks, with the grain, right? So the word grain used two completely different ways. So first of all, I want to clear up this, which is a confusing situation, I think. There's grain and then there's grain, two different things. So first, this is this topic right here. So see if this actually works here. If I take this off. So instead of talking about grain and trying to make sense of which is which, we're going to change up and use a different word for what you see on the outside of a board. We're going to call that figure, okay? And what is going on inside of a board, the cell structure, we're going to call that the grain. Kind of make sense? So that means that when you go up to a piece, you say, I admire the grain. You're really saying, well, I admire the figure of this piece. And if you're talking about planing a board or deciding how it should run through a joiner or a planer, then you're talking about grain. I wanted to come up with a different term for that, but I think grain is still the best way. So what I'm going to go through tonight is kind of how those two things relate to each other and don't relate to each other. But first of all, just separating them mentally, I think, is the right way to go. So if you see me looking down here, it's because I tried to write out everything I'm going to say tonight. How that's going to work out, I'm really not sure, because I want to get everything kind of in a logical order, rather than just jump from topic to topic. Okay, so anyway, if you have any questions, Charlie, as we go, then just pop up and only Charlie though, because otherwise we might be here all night long. Anyway, I'm going to start with another really simple statement, question, whatever. I hope it's written down here. This is one of those silly things that looks idiotic to say, but it's really important. Charlie, what does that say?
Bruce Hoagley.
Yeah.
Wood comes from trees.
Wood comes from trees. D-U-H, right? Duh. Well, it's a more profound thing than you might think of, because trees are pretty special things. They've been growing on this planet for millions of years. They're living things. What we're using in our wood shops is just one little slice of that formerly living thing. So as trees, as you know, they start out as little saplings, and then they go through an annual cycle of growing, resting, at least in the temperate climate up here, and so forth and so on, right? And every year it adds another, the tree that is, adds another layer of very dark wood usually to its outside core. And we all know about what growth rings are, right? So looking at a piece of wood like this, which you'll have to imagine this by looking at the end of that. We all know you can see the growth rings on the end of a board, right? I think I've got a stupid little picture here. Okay, it looks like a bullseye, but even at the back of the room, you can probably figure out what that is, right? We're looking at the end of a log. Pretty simple. So the dark lines in many woods represent the wood cells that are slowing down their growth in the summertime. And the spaces between the dark lines represents the kind of cells that are added as the tree grows rapidly in the spring. So rapid, slow growth, rapid, slow growth. We get distinct rings like that. In some woods, those rings are really prominent, not so prominent in other woods, right? But in any case, they always make patterns that we see on the face of a board. And it's really easy to see a pattern like that in this piece of ash, for instance. So looking at that figure, not grain, figure, right? There's a familiar shape here going on. And that's that shape, that arched shape like this, is usually called cathedrals, right? That's pretty common. Kind of like shaped like the cathedral of a Gothic arch. Cathedral, an apse, right? It's all done with a compass from 2 different points. And we just call it a cathedral because it's kind of a convenient analogy. But in other cultures, these things are called other things. A lot of, in Korea, for instance, they're often thought of as mountains, or you can think of it as a flame, always pointing that way, right? Okay, so let's see how woodworkers generally use that kind of figure. Here is a frame and panel door made out of pine, and the rings, the figure in this thing are a little indistinct, so I kind of outlined them in pencil to help you. But here's the question I want to ask you guys. So if you were making a door like this, would you prefer it to go this way or that way? Or is there any question about this? Is anybody voting for this? Not anybody? Come on. There you go, right. So in general, people are looking for the cathedrals to look like cathedrals, right? For the flame to look like a flame, for a mountain to look like a mountain. This is not new knowledge or anything like that. But I just wanted to let you know that one reason people prefer it that way is because it symbolizes strength and stability, kind of like looking at a person standing, their feet apart, or think of the Eiffel Tower. You know, upside down, that would look a little wacky like that. But I wanted to tell you, both approaches are totally legitimate. We're talking about aesthetics now. So sometimes things have a different dynamic in a piece of furniture when they're reversed. So that's a whole different feeling to a piece. It's instability. Instability is okay, especially if you're making art of some sort. Usually furniture, you're looking for stability, but when you're really stretching the limits on design, you might try a different way. So in my mind, both things are legitimate as long as the piece works that way. So an old friend of mine who went to a fancy art school many years ago learned from an instructor there that one way to evaluate a design is to turn it upside down. And he said if it doesn't look right upside down, then it isn't right side up either. But look, this simple example, though, of an arch brings up something I want to talk about. So here again is the quote right way to see a door. So what you're often looking at in something like this is your eye is going from its base up to the top and back down again. So what I want you to think about is how we look at furniture. Sometimes when you see a piece, you first see it as a whole, the whole thing. And then think about what happens next. Your eye picks some detail in it, some part of it, and starts to move around a piece of furniture. And it's often directed by the figure that's going on in a piece. In the case of a door like that, your eye goes at the base, probably first, maybe, goes up and then back down again, settled at rest. If that makes sense. And if I turn that upside down the other way, it's thrown into, you're starting into outer space here, coming down, and you're throwing back out again somewhere else. But the point is that your eye is that figure draws the eye by depending on the way it runs. So whenever I make a piece, I have dominant figure in the wood or something like that, I'm always thinking about, well, which way should things be going so your eye doesn't go sailing off the piece. It has to come back into itself. I mean, one great example of that, which I don't have with me here is, but you guys can use your imagination, is a tabletop made of big wide boards, but one that has breadboard ends on it. And you know what those things are? Those are the pieces that go across the top at the ends of the top. Well, not only do breadboard ends help to stabilize the top, keep it from warping, which is great, but they also keep an eye traveling around the top, because when you follow a figure, let's say the cathedral figure laying flat, this thing laying down like that. Instead of your eye just going right off the end and then having it back drawn again, it hits that breadboard end, hits it in a way, and then just gets directed right back to the top again. So it's not that every top needs breadboard ends, but there's a role for pieces, for things beyond just what they do functionally. Aesthetically, they make a difference also. So the concept I want you to keep in mind when you're looking at stuff is, well, how does your eye travel around a piece? So next I want to talk about how you might take a bunch of pieces and put them together. And before I launch into that, I just want to talk about how I start a project usually. I have a pencil sketch of some sort. Maybe it's drawn to scale, maybe not. Maybe it's just a napkin sketch. And I've got a cut list. And the cut list gives both the final dimension of every piece and something I call the rough size of every piece. I don't know if all of you guys work like this. I certainly did not learn this in my apprentice days, nor in my years as a furniture maker, where time was money, you just had to keep on going along. But now that when I got into the magazine business and now into the instruction business, the idea of having a formalized cut list is a terrific assistance. So this is another concept I want you to take away with you tonight if you don't know this already, and that is that it's important when you have a whole bunch of boards to refer to your cut list and cut every piece that you can reasonably cut to its rough size first. Rough size first. So I want to go into that. Many of you may do this already, many of you may not. So why do you do that? Well, this goes back to the concept of wood comes from trees. Trees, remember, as they're growing, they're fighting the elements, they're fighting to seek the light, and as they're doing that, they develop a whole lot of internal stresses inside of them. And also, when trees are cut into planks, and those planks are shoved into a kiln, the way the wood is dried from the outside into the center can also introduce stresses into the wood. So when you see when you see a piece of wood, beautiful figure, everything like that, actually inside there's a heck of a lot of stuff going on that you can't see on the outside. And what's going on is the stuff connected with the grain, the cell structure of the wood. So, a number of people have walked up here and noticed this thing. Does that look familiar? This has probably happened to every one of you at least once, and it's something you never forget. So, just to explain again, it's a board that was ripped on a table saw. This is the offcut. Both pieces have changed their shape. Not just this piece, but that changed its shape as well. So why did that happen? Well, when you were cutting it, you're relieving the stresses within the board, and they have to seek out a new balance for themselves. So wood can easily change shape especially after it's cut, especially a rip cut like that. This is dangerous, right? In the days before riving knives, if anybody remembers those days, especially when there was no way to really prevent the offcut from hitting the blade and being flung back at you, kickback accidents happen pretty frequently. And I hope today that all of you who have table saws use the riving knife all the time. As far as I can tell, there's no reason ever to take it out unless you're doing dado work. Every other time, that riving knife should always be in there, because something like that can happen and a nasty consequence. Anyway, enough of the bad stuff. So those stresses I've talked about, they're just baked into the wood's grain. And you can't tell by looking at a piece of wood on the outside what's going to happen when you cut it up on the inside. You have no idea. It might just stay perfectly straight. It might do something really wacky like that. So having been around a while, I always expect the worst, because I know it's going to happen eventually. You know, I'm cutting wood every day. And not only that, even after you cut open a piece like this, you know, it'll change dramatically right away, but then you probably also know that it might, that's the immediate change. Then there's a slow change that might take days or weeks or even months to work itself out. So the board is still trying to figure out how to balance all those stresses in the grain. So usually after you cut pieces to a rough size, you want to let them sit for a bit. And what that bit is kind of like depending on what kind of a schedule you're on. The longer you can wait, the better, but I mean, it's impractical usually to wait more than a couple of days. So anyway, that's why I always cut all my pieces oversize right at the start, because I don't know what's going to happen to them when I rip them later. And if they're just a little bit extra big, well, then they can do their own thing for a while. Yeah?
Does it matter if it's when it's a old virgin growth timber versus newer growth?
Well, you wouldn't know that when you buy a board. So no, not really. I mean, a tree is a tree. You know, it's in a forest, they're fighting for light in a different way than in a plantation, but they can still develop stresses. And again, the drying process can introduce stresses too. So there usually are fewer stresses from drying though when wood has been air dried, meaning it's put in a kiln, it was just put in a pile outside. But it's still no guarantee that those cuts will stay absolutely straight. So in other words, I assume the worst for everything. I'm never disappointed that way, I guess, when you think about it. Anyway, so I just wanted to pass this on to you. I have a set of standard overages for thickness and width and length on my cut list. So I'm going to share those with you. I always cut my pieces rough. so that they're 1/8 inch thicker than my final thickness, 1/4 inch wider, and 1 inch longer. Real easy numbers to remember, 1/8, 1/4, and 1. And where that went south was one of my students brought in a board that he said he had already milled to the final thickness, but we just needed to cut it narrower. Well, it was not just 1/4 inch narrower. It was, as you can see, it was like a full inch too wide. So that means when you make a large offcut like that, anything can happen. If that had only been 1/4 inch extra wide, as according to my scheme of things, the offcut can just do its own thing. Pretty harmless little thin piece of wood, and the main board won't change in shape very much. But he also made this mistake, and that is something that you guys might be familiar with. So if you have an entire board that whose every part that you're going to cut out of it needs to be, let's just say 3/4 of an inch, right? It's a 4/4 board. Wouldn't it make sense just to mill the whole thing down to 3/4 of an inch and start cutting it up later? What, Charlie? You're not agreeing. Why are you saying that, Charlie?
Because it can warp, and then you have to reflatten it, and then it's not 3/4.
Yeah, it's not plywood, is it? Right, so this is a hard-won lesson. Don't flatten the whole darn thing first, expecting it just is going to stay at that. So cut the pieces up smaller first. For one, they'll be easier to handle. I know it's it might seem less efficient to do that, but in the long run, it makes the most sense to end up with pieces that are going to stay the way you want them, flat and straight, right?
What if they're too short though, then, and like if you're not a hand planer, you have to build a sled in to send them through your planer?
No, I have a rule about that. I'm glad you asked, Peggy, because there are asterisks on all these things. You never cut anything shorter than 12 inches,
Right.
or whatever your minimum length is for the planer. That's the limiting tool usually in a machined up shop. And my planer, you know, I actually read the manual, oh my God. And I noticed, yeah. Anyway, it specified that an 8-inch piece is the shortest that would pass through there. So I actually took out a marker and wrote that on the planer so that we and my students would always remember that. So the neat thing is, Peg, if you have a bunch of short pieces, you can gang them up, and on your cut list, it should, actually you should say, instead of 6 pieces at, 3 inches long, let's say, you make one piece that's 18 inches long or longer or something like that. So you mill it as one piece, because the neat thing is, and you guys probably know this, that cross-cutting usually doesn't result in any distortion.
Right, okay, that makes sense.
It's the rip cuts that'll get you. The cross-cuts, don't worry about it. They'll be fine. Okay. So to avoid that kind of a situation, though, in my shop, we never cut rough lumber on the table saw. So how do we do it instead? On the bandsaw. And why? There's never going to be kickback on a bandsaw, ever. As you probably know, you can push a board into a bandsaw, stop halfway, leave the saw running, go have a cup of coffee, and nothing's going to happen because the blade is just going down, right? So it is, I hate to say it this way, but it is probably one of the safest tools to use in the shop. And in my shop, I have the good fortune of having a large bandsaw and a small bandsaw, but it doesn't really matter. A bandsaw is a bandsaw. You can always cut stuff up on it. So my rule is that no rough lumber goes onto the table saw. I don't use it for ripping on rough stuff, ever. Don't cross-cut with it. I use a sliding miter saw or a hand saw for cross-cutting. So all the rough cuts get done on the bandsaw, perfectly safe. My bandsaw also has a fence Time was, when I was a younger furniture maker, that few bandsaws had fences, but today they're pretty common. So if you have an older one that doesn't have one, there's always kind of some way to rig one up. But it makes an awful lot of sense to have a fence for your saw because it makes that cutting so much easier. On the other hand, you can always draw a line and just cut it freehand. Not that big a deal. Which kind of brings me to the next point I want to go at, and let's go back to looking at figure again, okay? Did I stray off the mark there a little bit? I was talking about grain, okay? Now we're going to go back to figure. This is kind of weird how this works, but sort this out. Oh, here's my rough dimensions, right? 1/8 inch thicker, 1/4 inch wider, 1 inch longer. So when you're cutting your planks up to make your parts, there's always a tension between the best yield you can get, meaning the most pieces out of the least amount of wood, or are you more concerned about getting the best figure out of the wood instead? It's always a tension between the two. Usually, in my mind, figure wins out. Because I figure, well, in 20 years after I've made the piece, I'm really not going to remember that I saved, a small amount of money and didn't buy an extra board. But I am going to be bothered by that crazy figure I put right there that just doesn't look right, because that's not going anywhere. So I look to figure first. But as I said, you have to have a balance between the two. So we're going to start out with a problem in figure. And that is the dreaded bullseye. So this board right here has a circular shape in the middle of it, right? Bullseye. And the problem with bullseyes, especially now that I've been talking about it with you, for you guys, is going to be that it's a whirlpool for your eye. So once it's like your figure, as I said, figure draws your eye. Bullseyes draw your eye into a little circular pattern, and it has to you fight to get out of the dang thing. So in general, when you can, I think personally they're just best avoided. You can't do it all the time, but if you can stay away from it, you should. So when you have a piece of wood with a bullseye in it, the best strategy is to cut through the middle of it and not off to one side and preserve it. Now that can make a great difference in the yield that you're going to get from the board, but in the end I think you're going to find that that's the best way to do. So sometimes it's just out of habit. When I'm with a student, we arrange all the boards on my layout table and table saw and look at them all over. The first thing you're looking for are the bullseyes. And if they're there, you say, well, that's going to be where a cut goes, a cross cut.
Can't that also be a point of?
Yes, it can. Yeah. So I'm not ironclad about all this stuff.
Good attention.
Yeah, right. It can. Yeah. If you want your eye to be drawn to something and it wanted to stay there, well, that's fine.
Yeah, how about for something like a chair seat?
Can you repeat the question, Tom, so that you're...
Yes. Thank you. So did you catch the first question, Matt?
Can't the bullseye be a center of good attention?
Can the bullseye be? Yes. And the answer is yes. So it just depends on your creativity. So I want you to know what you're doing when you use one. I guess that's the main point. And Peg, your question was?
Something like a chair seat or,
Yes.
or the back, the rail on the back of a chair.
Yes.
Where it would sort of bring it to the center.
That may or may not be a good idea, right? And sometimes you don't know, well, like a chair seat that you're gonna use a
Yeah.
travisher to hollow it, you don't know what the grain's really gonna look like when you're done either. So yes, in that case, maybe it's a good thing, maybe not.
Okay,
Yeah, it just depends.
then you just paint it.
Yeah, that's what happens to chair seats, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, when you cut a bullseye in half like that, you get like this upper drawing right here, right? Well, what do you get from it? Two nice arched figures instead of one off-center whirlpool. Okay. So let's move on to other problems with figure. Now we're still talking about, the whole board. We haven't done any cross-cutting yet. We're still figuring things out. Oh, and by the way, the first thing, you probably know this already, that you do with rough lumber is to cut off the ends before you do anything else, because you want to be able to avoid the cracks that may or may not be there. So sometimes you just have to keep on cutting till you get past the cracks, or sometimes you say, well, I know, okay, there's a deep crack there. I just have to work around it. But you don't know what the usable length of your piece of wood is going to be until you do that first. Anyway, here's another crazy situation to be in, and that is that the arched figure in my board is kind of running off at an angle. And that's more common than it following the edge of the board. So what I would do is to make new long edges. So I want to give you guys the freedom, if you don't have it already, to make a different edge on your board than just the way the plank came from the lumberyard. That's just, that edge was just made because it was convenient. But your edge can run off at a completely different angle. That's perfectly fine. It means you're going to have some more waste wood, but at least then, like this piece right here, the arch figure won't be running off at some cockamamie angle either. So how do you do that? Well, it's not that hard, at least in my shop. I would use the sliding miter saw to cross-cut it at that angle, just eyeball it, and then take it to the bandsaw, right? So if I drew the lines on the wood in advance, I can just freehand cut the shape out from there. I don't need to use the fence or anything else. You just cut away. Now, obviously, you shouldn't or shouldn't is the right word, do that on a table saw. Not good. Now you could do that kind of with a track saw. It's a little awkward though. And I know track saws are popular substitutes for table saws, but it's pretty hard to beat a bandsaw for this kind of a job. So, new edges, what the heck? So how about this lower example? Here's a case where if I cross-cut, this is why I put the X by it. If you just cross-cut right there and use both of these pieces, you're kind of stuck with two pieces whose figure just doesn't gonna work. Runs off at a crazy diagonal instead of following an edge. Okay. Rearrange your pieces in all kinds of ways so that the figure doesn't have to follow the edge, but just looks a little more harmonious with it. So this is hard to do just by drawing lines. So one of the things I've done, especially when I have to make a whole bunch of parts the same way, is to cut out a window from whatever material. And let's say this is your piece of wood that you're working with, right? Well, to visualize that shape on there without this thing is kind of tough. But once you put the window on here, you can easily tweak it one way or the other You know, having a border all the way around something makes it a lot easier to find what the right cut of the board should be. This, of course, is the rough size, not the final size of your piece. So you just have to make sure you get that right. So especially when you're dealing with really subtle figure like this spalted wood like that, getting that, if this was like a jewelry box, for instance, you'd really want to get that figure to be just so. And it's pretty hard to do it just by eyeballing it. This makes all the difference in the world. Not hard to do, right? Just a piece of cardboard, a few cuts, and you're off. All right. Remember where I'm at here. So here's some other problems in gluing up that I wanted to share with you. So here I've got a wide board with pretty nice arched figure on it, but all I need is pieces that are half as wide as the whole board is. Well, in my view, it's a big mistake to just cut that thing right down the middle, even though that might get you your best yield, because you're going to end up with two pieces whose figure, I was tempted to say grain there for a minute, right? Whose figure runs off at a diagonal angle. Not great. So I think the better solution is to preserve the arches, cut on either side of them, and then if you need to, take those two outer pieces, glue them together so it's still usable wood, use it for something else. So again, you've cut down on your yield. Okay. If it's teak, maybe you might think twice about it, but something expensive. But for most wood, just do the right thing, save the art, save the beautiful figure in it, and deal with the wood on either the outside of it. Remember, you can always make wood wider or narrower. It's hard to make it longer. Not impossible, but hard. But you can always glue things together and make them wider. So you don't rarely throw pieces of wood away that can be glued up into something else. Okay, there's another drawing here I want to share with you. Well, this one is really simple, and then I'm going to skip to another one. This is just an illustration of when I'm cutting up a lot of parts. My cut list is organized by part letters. So the cut list also contains the names of parts, but when I'm marking out parts and keeping track of them as they're being milled, I never write the names of the parts on the wood. I just use letters. Letters are unambiguous. You always know what you're talking about. It's part A, part B, part C, whatever it is. And after cutting the piece, this is just practical advice here. What you want to do is to take those letters and write them on the ends of your boards, because what's the first thing you're going to do with the board after it's cut? Is remove the part letter on the face, right? You're going to flatten the face, and you can easily lose track of where you're at. So just simple practical advice. Use letters on a cut list and put them in the right places. But what I wanted to share with you is some examples of how to use that wood that kind of runs out at an angle, because you're going to get stuck with pieces like that. So this is kind of hard to see, but let me just share this with you. Here, there are three pieces of wood that are glued together. That's a glue line right here. So when I look at a piece like this one right here, I say, okay, it's got kind of a straight side, it's got kind of a busy side. And what works usually best is matching busy to busy and straight to straight. you can't really always make it look like it was just one board like this, but I don't know if you can see the mismatch in the growth rings. They don't really line up, but in general it works. If you have down here, for instance, I've done the opposite. Here are the growth rings, the arches curling around like this, but right next to it is a whole bunch of straight lines. And to my eye, that doesn't work nearly as well as if you were just to put, as I said, the operative phrase here is busy to busy, straight to straight. Does that make sense? Kind of? Okay. And the other thing to avoid, if you can, is something like this, where the figure just runs right off the edge. And of course, the problem with that is that your eye follows it, and your eye will, I mean, sounds crazy to think of it this way, but your eye will follow that and get lost. It falls off the edge, and it has to find its way back. So if possible, let's say if that were a desktop, for instance, that would be perfectly reasonable as the front, back, right? Well, okay, if I have to use that board, it's got to go somewhere. If I that up with anything else internally, because it's so wacky, put it in the back. But if it's a dining table, you're kind of hosed. Anyway, all the things you want to think about before you start cutting up those 10 precious boards into other pieces is how is the figure going to work? All right. Whew. So I'm going to change the subject entirely right now and go back to grain. Okay, we've been talking about figure for a while here. Of course, all that figure I was mentioning, that is all a result of those growth rings, right? So that's part of the grain, the growth rings, but it translates into figure. Now we're just going to talk about grain for a bit. So here is, your typical log as it's going to go into the sawmill. Oftentimes they just saw things through and through, kind of like slicing up a loaf of bread. And the top cut right here is pretty representative of what you see, right? The growth rings here become the arches on the top of the board. And that piece of wood is called a plain sawn board. You probably all know that term, right? So we're going to go into the two other types of boards and what makes them different in a minute here. So plain sawn wood is the vast majority of all the wood you're ever going to encounter. Let's take a look at the next picture here. If I take that plain sawn board and rip it into 3 pieces, the outer 2 pieces have a whole different quality to them because of the way that the growth rings are oriented. So as you probably know, that kind of a cut, a board like that, is called rift sawn, R-I-F-T, rift sawn. I don't know where that comes from, it doesn't matter. So here's some real wood like that. For instance, this is firmly a big 2x6 or something like that. This piece over here would be the rift sawn piece, right? And one of the neat things about rift sawn wood and why I'm going to make a big deal about it is this unusual quality of it is that it has straight lines usually on the top and straight lines on the edge. Straight lines all the way around. Whereas a plain sawn board like this usually has the arched figure or something like that on the face and straight lines on its edges, ideally. I mean, obviously things waver all over the place. But why make such a big deal about riffs on wood. Well, here's another example of it. So you can just see by looking at the end grain, right? That all the growth rings are running approximately at 45 degrees. And that means that no matter which face of it you look at it, of course not in this one, those two faces at least, it looks pretty much the same. And what that is handy for, it's another example of one right here, is in making legs. Legs for tables and things like that. It's not definitely a requirement in my mind to use riffs on wood for a square leg, but it helps. So in a riffs on leg, the grain is going to look similar on all four sides instead of changing dramatically from one face to another face. And if you were to catch? You want to hold this? Oh yeah, oh, it's precious wood. This is actually a pretty neat piece of walnut. So riffs on square. And also if, you know, these days it's not so easy rather to buy really thick wood. I mean, it gets really expensive, doesn't it? So often you end up gluing legs up out of two pieces. And what I want you to keep in mind is you can take two pieces of riffs on wood, glue them together, and get what looks like one big, large piece. In fact, if you're really clever about it, you can fake yourself out, in fact, so you can't even tell there's a glue line between the two pieces because the grain is straight on both of them, and it's easier to match up. Yes?
On a piece of riffs on material, is the movement pattern similar to a flat sawn or a plane sawn, or is that, can you count on that movement pattern being different because it's hard to tell the face from the edge?
So repeat the question into your mic, please.
Yes, I will. Right. So if you could repeat the movement you asked whether the movement pattern on a piece of riffs on wood is the same as on a piece of plain sawn wood. Is that right?
Because if you're going to do a plain sawn wood, it's going to expand across the face of the grain.
Yep. Ah, so the movement you're talking about is actual physical change in the size of the board, right?
Yes, sir.
Not the eye movement, right? Just so we know what we're talking about. Well, fortunately, I'm not going to answer that. Not going to answer it yet, because we are definitely going to get to wood movement in a little bit. So hang on to that. Don't let me off the hook, okay? We'll talk about that.
Tom,
Yes.
are you gonna talk about using riffs on wood to have the figure follow a curve?
No.
Okay.
Am I going to talk about riffs on wood going to follow a curve? Well, I'd love to, Charlie, but we don't have all night, do we? So there's a million, I mean, we're talking about grain and figure, things that we encounter every day. This is a huge area, topic, and you could go down a million rabbit holes with it and get into all kinds of arcane discussions about how, like, how to saw out a chair back so that you have the best figure. Well, that can go on and on forever. So, no.
Okay.
But hold that question for some other time.
Tom,
Yes.
are baseball bats rift cuts or is that a different cut?
Excellent question. So when you turn a plain sawn board and when you turn a riff sawn board, can you tell the difference? Let's say I have a square of plain sawn wood. Now, Peggy, you're going to answer this for me. Okay, I have a square that is, I'm calling plain sawn. I have another square that is riff sawn. I'm going to turn both into cylinders, baseball bats. And I show them to you. Brad, could you tell me which one is which after they're turned? And the answer is no, because you're going all the way around it. Doesn't matter. We're talking about things that are squares to start with, though.
It goes longitudinal, right? You've got a longitudinal
Yeah.
spindle.
Yeah, if you're turning around the single, you can't tell what the board was to begin with. Doesn't matter. I hope that makes sense. Might have to think, no.
The end grain on the bat, figure it out.
Well, it's round.
Yeah, because
So,
your end grain's
so I said, you know, rift sawn, the growth rings are running at 45 degrees to a straight, flat face. When something is round, it's running 45 degrees to a circle. Well, where's the flat face?
your end grain's still on the ends, so it doesn't,
Yeah,
so your sides, I mean, when it's round, you're still gonna have tangential.
you're gonna have all
You're gonna have all the.
of them. I just happen to have somewhere, where did it go?
You get the spindle over there.
There is, all the way up to exhibit 13 here, and we haven't got there yet. But here you go, this is a baseball bat 2B that I have turned into an octagon because I like turning things that have had the corners knocked off first. Not everybody's like that. But you're gonna see every single type of wood figure on the outside of this when you're done. And when I'm done, I can't tell what the original face was anymore, right? Because it's gonna be round. Does that clear anything up for you, Brad?
Thanks. Can I offer a follow-up
Sure.
on that, or ask a follow-up?
Yep.
When I was in baseball, they taught us,
Use the trademark.
yeah, and the cross grain should
Yeah.
striking the ball because of strength.
Yeah,
Is
that's,
that true when you're picking out a hammer handle too?
oh boy. I don't think so. But I'm no expert in picking out hammer handles. So. I've only done it
Or
once,
an
I
axe
think.
or-
Yeah, I don't know. I think for those things, you want wood that's been split along the grain. But, and which one is, whether it's the broad side or the narrow side, I can't imagine that it makes a whole lot of difference. Anyway, sir, you had a question way in the back there before, right? Somebody did. Raise a hand.
Oh, there was a question about pith.
Pith.
Matter if
P-
you're pith, P-I-T-H.
Got it. Okay, what's the question about pith?
Does it matter if you cut like a cylinder
Yep.
along the pith? In other words, the pith was in the center like a bullseye.
Yes, it does. So pith in general is something to be avoided. If you go by 2x4s though at a big box store, you're going to see it all the time because they are using really small trees. The problem with pith sections of anything is that is often called juvenile wood. It's the wood that was part of the sapling when it was starting to grow. And that has a lot of internal stresses in it. So that wood is usually very unstable. And it also, probably, if you have a board with pith in the center, it's probably at some point going to crack as it dries out. So just in general, when I need to buy big boards cheaply at a big box store, even if I need a 2x4 sized piece, I will go to the 2x10s and the 2x12s and rip it down the middle or something like that. Cut out the pith, just get rid of it, and use the wood on either side of it. So I don't know if you guys know this though, but as you get into longer and wider boards at a big box store, you'll get better and better wood. The worst. Pardon me? I don't know. Do they glue sumac into boards? Beats me. Could be. Yeah, that could well be. Yeah, so pith also has is often rotten as well. So anyway, just in general, you know, when there's pith inside a piece of hardwood, cut around it. It's not a good thing to be using because it's just very unstable. Okay, rifts on wood. I think we beat that horse for a little bit. So, so rifts on wood is good for table legs, I said. So here's a drawing illustrating what I was just talking about. So on one you see a leg that has similar grain on two sides, and you can see the plain sawn look versus another straight figured look on the other side, right? So again, I don't think this should ever be an absolute requirement because that's what you got stuck with. You know, you have to make legs like that. But in general, when the situation allows, I would opt for the rift sawn look instead, unless it's going to be turned. Okay, so here's another situation though where rift sawn wood is of value, and that is in making moldings. So here is the 45-degree growth rings in my piece of rift sawn wood. Here's the 45-degree growth rings also, but they're running in different directions. So what the heck is going on here? This one I got the check mark by because the result of having the rings go this way is that you end up with pretty straight lines inside your molding. And that means that your eye is not going to get distracted by some crazy figure in the molding. Your eye is going to be attracted to the shape of the molding and not what's inside the molding. Whereas when you cut it this way, same piece of wood, just cut a different way, what you end up on the inside can be a bunch of arched figure. In fact, it's totally unpredictable what you're going to get. You have no idea. So look before you cut. Yes?
Back to your table, like if you have your rift sawn blade, but you make the legs taper, you're going to be creating cathedrals.
Well, tapering a leg, yeah, you have to pay attention to the question is, when you make a tapered leg, you have to pay attention to how the grain is going to run. So the grain follows as much as, I'm sorry, did I say grain again? See how easy it is? Figure. You want the figure to follow the taper as much as possible if you have a choice. The last thing you want is for the for the figure to run out at an angle. And usually you can determine that before you cut the tapers. But it's one of those, like the molding, stop and think before you start slicing stuff up willy-nilly and think about what you're going to get. Is that an answer? Okay, great. Okay. Let's move on to the third type of wood, which I know you all are expecting to hear about. So cutting deeper down into that same log, we get a piece of wood that's cut right near the pith, right? But on either side of the pith, we're not ignoring that, is wood that's called quarter sawn, right? And this is special stuff for a number of reasons. So why is it called quarter sawn though? I got a drawing. So sometimes when logs are cut, they're actually rotated as they're being cut instead of just being sliced through and through. So that log is going to be rotated 4 times. And quarters. And these are going to be the planks that are cut out of it. And what distinguishes this kind of wood is, again, it's the orientation of the growth rings. They're running at 90 degrees to a broad surface. Well, as you can imagine, that's a really wasteful way of sawing up a log. And as far as I know, there are only a few species of wood that are actually cut on purpose that way. You know, the oaks being notable among them. A few others, but that's pretty much it. So as we get a little deeper into the advantages of quarter sawn wood, I just want you to know in advance that you can still find quarter sawn wood in a giant pile of plain sawn boards. Because as that wood is cut through, and you're going to find a board like that at some point. that middle board. And it's easy to spot it. Sometimes if you can see it from the end, you can see them coming down when you look at the whole pile. But when you see all those straight lines on either side of something, that's quarter sawn wood. So anyway, the word quarter sawn comes from that kind of turning the log as it's cut. But what is the big deal about quarter sawn wood? Well, to answer that question, we have to dive down even deeper into wood science and talk about wood movement. Okay? Movement being not dancing, but changing shape. So, bunch of straws taped together. So I want you to think of the cells in a tree as being like straws. They carry water up, nutrients down. They're not exactly shaped perfectly round like this, or they're that length, but basically straws are the easiest way to think about it. So for instance, when I splintered off this, just whacked off this piece of wood from here. Oh, you know, if I pass this around, you're going to see a bunch of neat things, but be careful. It's got sharp edges to it. There aren't any Band-Aids in here anymore. So anyway, wood cells are like straws, but unlike straws, they change shape as they take on and lose moisture. Certainly from cutting a tree down to when it's dried in the kiln, all the straws get a little bit smaller. But even after wood is dry, the cells change shape in response to changes in temperature. Is it? Humidity. And only temperature as it follows humidity. So humidity is the big deal. So we all know that doors can get stuck in the summertime and loosen up in the wintertime. Well, we know that something is changing shape. Well, if we think of those straws as circular at some point in their life, they don't, when they gain humidity, gain moisture, they don't become larger circles. This is the strange thing about it. They become ovals. Or if they started as ovals, they become even bigger ovals. And what I wanted to illustrate with this was that, the direction in which the cells become ovals matters. So let me explain that a minute. Lost my straws here. So, here is a really close view of the end grain of something, okay? So these lines here are the growth rings. And here's straws placed just arbitrarily for now right on the growth rings, doesn't matter, just wherever they're scattered. So can you see which way they grow? The ovals become wider this way around the growth ring and less wide this way. Soaking that in? Yeah. Okay. And we're going to use some shorthand for that. This kind of movement, when they get skinny, just a little bit wider that way, is called a radial movement because it radiates out from the center of the tree. Okay? Make sense? And that's abbreviated as an R. So the movement that takes place around the growth ring, for instance, the big movement, that's called tangential movement because it's on tangents to the circles and abbreviated as a T. You with me on that? So the tangential movement is always greater than the radial movement. T is always greater than R. So here's an actual piece of wood with these lines drawn on it. The tangential movement is happening around like that, and the radial movement is going like that. One is bigger than the other. This is always more than that. So this is a little bit of a leap here, but bear with me. Let's go back and look at our piece of quarter sawn wood. The R movement is, remember, that's from the center of the tree out, going this way. Remember, that's the smaller movement. So there's less movement across the width of that board than, here's a plain sawn board, where it's mostly the opposite kind of movement. This is the tangential movement that's happening right down here. So one big advantage of quarter sawn wood like this is that it doesn't shrink and swell nearly as much as that does. So on average, sounds kind of crazy, that the difference between these two kinds of movement is doubled. Twice as much movement one way as the other. But of course that varies from species to species. So years ago I was stuck with the question of, well, how am I going to predict how much a board is going to move? Like if I cut a drawer front, how much bigger is it going to get from season to season? And there's all kinds of complicated formulas you can use for figuring that out, but I kind of cut to the chase with a little bit of extra work and made a series of graphs. These graphs are extremely useful, and they're available, have been for years, on the Guild website by each species. So on cherry, for instance, I can look at this and say, okay, this last line over here, I know you can't see that exactly, a 10-inch board is going to move 3/32 of an inch. That's where the black line goes. The black line represents a plain sawn board. You with me on that? The red line underneath it, can you make that out? That's a quarter sawn board. Going to move considerably less. And using the same graph, I can go back and say, okay, a 3-inch board is only going to move 1/32 of an inch if it's plain sawn. Well, how about a 30-inch wide board? Where, 10 boards glued together to make 30 inches. Well, you just take the 10, for instance, and multiply it by 3. It's that simple. As you add wood, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's all additive. It doesn't change, the amount doesn't change. And someone asked before about the difference in wood movement between rift sawn and plain sawn. Was that your question, sir? Yes. So what's the answer? Yes, there is a difference.
There is.
Yep. It's not on the chart, though. No.
Rift isn't on your chart. You're
No.
just doing plain to quarter.
Yeah, right. So figure it as halfway in between, and you'll still come out okay. But yeah, to answer the basic question, yes, it does matter which way the cells or the growth rings go. Okay? Yes, in the back.
Would you say extending that, Tom, to an entire piece, it would be like constructionally sound to be consistent on whether you're using flat sawn, plain sawn, or rift sawn, or quarter sawn?
Constructionally,
Consistently, they'll expand and contract consistently, so you won't have to worry about.
so the example that you're using, the question, let's say you've got a large tabletop, okay? Is that where we're going with this? And you've mixed up quarter sawn and rift sawn and plain sawn, is that your question? I'm trying to figure this out. What? I'm sorry.
I want like a frame and panel because that incorporates, you know, many different ways of the whole thing, but you don't want that blowing apart.
Right. So on a frame and panel door, you just have to worry about the expansion and contraction of the panel. So you have to have enough leeway in the grooves so that the panel doesn't, in expanding, blow the joints apart. Right? Unless it's plywood. So having these charts at hand simplifies matters immensely to try and answer these questions of how much it's going to move, because it is going to move.
What's the move over what? Is from 0% humidity to 100%?
No. Another good question. What is the difference in change? 0 humidity to, well, I don't know where that is. Maybe Egypt in the somewhere. But anyway, these charts are only good for us here in the upper Midwest, because the amount that stuff moves depends on the average change in humidity from summer to winter. And wouldn't you know it, we're so lucky to live in the part of the world that has about the largest change ever. So this may sound crazy, but Hawaii, Florida, Arizona doesn't have these wide swings in humidity, even by the sea, you know. The humidity is more constant, so the amount of change in wood is a lot less there than it is here. So we have to account for basically the widest range, which is somewhere from 5% to maybe up to 12%. 7 percentages of change. It can be that wacky. Yes?
How do you calculate the length of the breadboard end on a tabletop?
How do you calculate the length of a breadboard end?
The tabletop is expanding this way, and your breadboard end is the other direction.
Yes, it is, isn't it? How can that possibly work? So,
It works, but I've also made the mistake where it didn't work.
so here's our breadboard end, right? Well, you already assumed something that I didn't mention, but wood does not change in length. Okay? Not appreciably. So we call that a 0. Whereas this is constantly changing. You've put the two together. You have a potential serious issue with cracking, correct? Well, if the way that you've put the two together, let's say you've screwed this thing on together somehow. So there's screws all along here. That would look pretty ugly, but it would be really stupid also, because it would prevent this from moving. So give. It wants to move desperately as humidity changes, and it's going to develop a nasty crack somewhere. But I have glued breadboard ends onto tabletops many times, and it works for 2 reasons. Because one, you make, well, let's say you're making mortise and tenon joints the old-fashioned way. So you would make a center tenon and a center mortise the same size, no problem. And then as you go out from either side to there, the mortises should become larger. So that would allow the tenons to move in and out, right? And the neat thing that we can do these days is if you use plain old yellow glue to glue that whole thing together, it won't crack.
Glue will move with it then, huh?
Glue is, yeah, yellow glue is never brittle hard. It's always elastic. It'll move really, it'll take that very slow movement and allow the top to expand and contract. Now, not all glues are like that though. In the old days when they used high glue, high glue is really brittle. It can't take that kind of movement at all. But yellow glue will.
You don't need the pins necessarily.
No, just glue it. It'll work.
So what about the breadboard end itself? And how do you calculate how long that should be? To the width of what you're-
Well, it's only going to be the same well, let's put it this way. If I cut it today so that it's flush on both ends, it'll only be like that one more time during the year, and all the rest of the year, something's gonna be different.
Aesthetically, would that mean you just split the difference and call it good?
You could, or you put a reveal between the two pieces, a little V groove, that kind of hides any difference in it. And there's all kinds of clever ways to make it enhance the fact that things are not even. I won't go into that, but but that will happen. Yes, it will either get smaller or larger. That's kind of a goes with the territory kind of a thing. Okay, how are we doing on time, by the way, guys? Okay, I got a little bit more. Okay, good. Okay, any other interesting questions? Yes, Brad.
In regards to the oval and the radial and tangential.
Yes.
Would the tangential then contribute to more cupping?
Yes.
If you have more-
Glad you asked that. So what I want you to think about is that if my fingers here are representing a growth ring, okay? All the cells are trying to shorten up when the wood dries all along that growth ring. And that is why wood always cups, meaning it warps across the grain like this. It always warps in the opposite direction from the growth rings. Because you think of it this way, they're like rubber bands, they're always trying to shrink. And in shrinking, it pulls the ends of the board into a cup figure. So 90% of all cup boards are cupped in the opposite direction from the growth rings. Yep. And that also has to do with pith. Because the closer your growth rings are to the pith, the more circular they are, the greater the distance they're going to shrink, and the greater the chance of it cupping. Yet another reason to stay away from that stuff. Did that make sense, by the way? I'm just drawing figures in the air, so just bear with me here. Yes, in the back.
Bamboo boards.
Yes.
Properties that root up bamboo boards.
Well, it's not wood. I only know about wood. Bamboo is.
The reason I asked is I bought a piece at Room and Board
Yeah.
for $99. It had been listed at $549.
Yeah.
And it was a outdoor tabletop.
An outdoor tabletop made of bamboo. Oh, interesting. Okay.
I built a white oak frame, and then I put over the top of it a roof for winter, you know, and
Yeah.
keep the snow off and the rain off.
Right.
I don't know what the properties are.
Of
I
no,
don't
it's
even know if it's a wise idea to use it as a picnic table, but that's how it's sold.
well. First, I'd assume that it acts like wood,
Yeah,
but it's a grass,
yeah.
not wood, right?
And you can't smoke it. It's not smokable.
Yeah, no. No, I've tried that too, and it doesn't work. So whether it shrinks and swells as much, that's a great. Ask the great Google. I really don't know. My charts do not have bamboo on them. But somewhere out there is an answer. I just don't know what it is. But I would assume it would move. But that does raise an interesting point about wood and especially furniture imported from more humid climates. This is a common problem, that pieces that are fabricated overseas in a more humid environment when they're imported into the United States, or an antique, for instance, from Europe where it's a little bit damper, face a very dry climate here in the upper Midwest, and they just crack like crazy because they weren't built to accommodate that. So we have to do, and I'm certainly not going to go into this tonight, there's a lot of ways that you have to adapt your building techniques to accommodate wood movement, and you ignore that fact at your peril, so to speak, because wood will move, and if it can't, it will split.
Can you coat it so it doesn't?
Can you completely seal it so it doesn't move at all? No. Finish will slow it down, and some finishes will slow it down more than others, but nothing short of, I don't know what exactly, many layers of polyurethane or something like that would absolutely stop it. It might. You want to put up with kind of finish? I don't think so. Yes, Oz?
Stabilized wood, I think they replace the water in the pores with resin,
Yes,
and that doesn't move much, right?
correct. There are ways around this problem if you modify the wood. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Holes? So let's go back to the main line here. Oh, one more thing though. Breadboard ends. They slow down the movement of the main top because you've covered over the ends of the straws. So wood gains and loses moisture much more rapidly out its ends than its sides or its tops. So if you can seal up that end, which is why they paint planks before they're kiln dried. If you seal it up, for instance, by gluing a breadboard end on, you've covered over all those end cells, and that helps to slow the rate down. So wood responds slowly to these changes. And if you can,
helps close those ends up.
yeah, and the yellow glue closes it up too. So you've done two things to help prevent that top from cracking then. Okay, whew, boy. All right, let's go on to something else for a change. So we just covered the three types of wood, meaning plain sawn, rift sawn, quarter sawn. Their major differences. Oh, I didn't finish my thoughts on that though, because I wanted to say, quarter sawn wood is hard to find, but you can manufacture it. So this is not exactly hidden growth. You can see the glue lines probably, but those are narrow pieces of quarter sawn wood all glued together. And what you can do by sawing off the quarter sawn parts of boards is to manufacture something, a wider piece that may look like it's all quarter sawn. Because good luck finding a wide piece of quarter sawn wood like this. I mean, you can, but it's pretty unusual. The other thing I've done, and this is going to sound absolutely crazy, but does work, is that I've taken a thick board like this, for instance, a plain sawn board, and ripped it into narrow pieces, changing the angle of the saw blade with every cut, so that when you turn the pieces on their side, you have a whole bunch of little skinny pieces of quarter sawn wood. Square those up, glue them together. You're reconstituting this into something completely different. And the look is, the figure, is completely different also. One other thing about wood movement I wanted to pass on to you is I keep track of it in my wood shop with this device. Has anybody seen anything like this before? Okay. So, do you have one? Yeah. Oh, good. Anyway, this is a bunch of pieces of wood glued together, right? So this is basically like a wide tabletop. And since there's so much end grain showing here, respond to those changes in humidity pretty quickly. So in other words, the distance between my fingers right here is going to change over the course of the year, right? You with me on that? Okay. I don't care what the number is, but the stick that's screwed onto the end here has its grain running the long way. Well, guess what? That does not change. So what I'm interested in is the relative difference between the big thick piece and this piece. When this piece in the summertime will stick out farther than that, and in the wintertime, it'll become narrower than that. Does that make sense, guys? And what I did, just because I've been an engineer this way, I made a graph and tracked it over the course of 3 years, every month, how it's going. And then when I realized that I was in it's in the middle, I just cut the two together so that they were flush, so that I don't know if you can see this, the line running down the middle is, you're halfway through between winter and summer movement. So if somebody asks me, you know, is, like today, is wood at its narrowest? It's, well, probably, but I don't really know. I pick this thing up, look at it, and say, oh, it's sticking over by 3/32. I can measure that. Look at my chart here, say, oh, that's the most it's ever shrunk. It must still be at its driest.
Screws are in there?
Pardon me?
How many screws are in that?
That's only two little screws right here. So it's just held at one end.
Other end's wild.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, right? Oh, jeez. We'll pass that around. So anyway, this is,
Mine is, they're glued together, and so when the flats on expand, the other board bends,
oh,
so you can use the humidity.
sure. Like a hygrometer.
So much movement there.
Yeah, old-fashioned hygrometers used to work like that with little spiral springs, right? Anyway, I thought that was more direct. It's just a question of expansion and contraction. So I can tell where we are in any season in my shop was what counts, just by looking at this thing.
Or you could look at the sun.
Well, the neat thing about those graphs, Doug, we said you can just tell by the month of the year. You can't, be sure, because it is different from year to year. And that's what the graphs taught me, is that it's not the same every August or the same every June. It just kind of depends on what kind of a year it's been. Yes.
Tom, we got a question from YouTube Live that says, can you explain the correlation between the relative humidity and EMC? His charts show, oops, I lost it. Hang on. His charts show EMC 5 to 12%, but what range of relative humidity is this?
I don't know the answer to that, but I know who would. Charlie, you mentioned the gentleman's name. Yes, there is a terrific book, not for the layman, but you might be able to figure it out. It was written for the layperson by a guy named Bruce Hoadley, Hoadley, called Understanding Wood. And everything, all the technical information you need to know about wood is in there somewhere. Bruce does not have this. Because as I said, this is for us here in the upper Midwest. Bruce, of course, is writing for a wider audience. So using his book, you can figure out using some calculations how much wood is going to expand and contract. These charts, stupidly simple. So, yes?
Do you want to talk at all about how to arrange your wood when you're tooling up?
No. Do I want to talk about how to arrange it?
To avoid the cupping and so forth.
Okay, sorry, I should address this. So standard wisdom when you're gluing up a top is that you would take your plain sawn wood and alternate the pattern of the rings in order to keep the top as flat as possible. And all I can say is that at some point that was probably really sound advice, but I don't follow it. Most wood that has been properly kiln dried, which is what we're mostly using, is extremely stable. Once you've flattened it, let it sit, avoid the pith, and flatten it again, it's going to stay flat, no matter which way the rings go. So this is a case of I prefer to think of the way the figure looks over this theoretical over and under and over and under kind of a look. But I know that's old wisdom. And that was for older circumstances when wood wasn't dried as scientifically, shall we say, as it is today. Yes, Oz?
Your device actually shows that. Half of it's alternating and half of it's the grain going in the same direction.
Yeah, I'm sure it's
One
totally
has a
arbitrary.
bigger bow than the other.
Yeah.
Tom, I got
Yes.
a related comment to that question about altering the grain.
Yes.
And I have seen some circumstances where one time I remember I glued some mahogany together and inadvertently had one of them flip the other direction.
Yes.
When I put the finish on it, that board that was flipped the other direction just jumped out because the light reflected
Now that's I'm glad you brought that up, Charlie. Light reflects differently off of wood because of its grain, its cell structure, and how it exits the surface, if I can say that right. Because that's what you were looking at. Cells were oriented differently on one side of the board than on the other. And when light hit it, you get it. Well, we're going to get into that a little bit, but let me just point another example. You can often see it at buildings like this. The doors are often made from book-matched veneers, right? So the book-matched veneers, you slice a log open like this. So what you're seeing on the top side is one side of the cells are going this way, for instance, on this piece, and they're going that way on that piece because of your opening up. And you often get what's called a barber pole effect, where one stripe side is light, and the next side is dark, light, dark, an effect you don't usually want.
You can get that with solid.
Well, same. Veneer is just really thin solid wood. Yeah, same thing. When you book match stuff, you run into that problem of getting one side dark and one side getting light when you finish it. And when you first cut a board open for book matching, you might think, oh, geez, this is going to look gorgeous. And then you put, a seal coat on it, and it looks horrible. So it can happen. So anyway, we'll get to that. Maybe, kind of. We're running short on time here. So there's only one last thing I want to look at. And I'm skipping through these pages here. And then there's another whole subject. I just wanted to bring this up now because I'm thinking of it, having to do with grain and not necessarily figure. And this is a dilemma that all of us have to face at some point, and that is, how do you figure out which way the grain goes in a board? Before you're setting it up for planing or jointing or something like that. I'm not going to talk about that tonight. Mostly, I want to save that for a different guild meeting, because I think it's a topic that, we all of us face. We all have our different methods of doing it. All I want to do is pass on to you this little bit of wisdom, and that is that merely looking at the figure ain't enough. You'll only be right about 75% of the time. Figure meaning the growth rings. That is not the best way to figure out grain direction. And what is? Just going to let that go, okay? Because that's a deep well to go down. Okay. One more thing about wood I want to talk about. This is a kind of a weird topic, but it has to do with quarter sawn wood. This is kind of where I was. Remember quarter sawn wood? We were there before a little while ago. Here again is a drawing of the end of a log. And can you see all those little lines that are radiating out from the center? Well, those are not the same kinds of cells as these straws that make up most of the tree. These are called ray cells, and I've made this really funky little device here. So I've glued in little pieces of veneer to represent the ray cells.
Put it under the camera over there.
Okie dokie, good idea. Ah! You see that? Great idea. Who said that? Thanks. Finally get to use it. Jeez, got all this technology. We haven't done a whole lot with it. Anyway, so ray cells are like, maybe you can see that from here, playing cards. That's their shape. They are really thin, but wide. And they radiate out from the center of a tree. So all species of wood have these ray cells in them. In some, though, they are so small you just you can't hardly make them out. In others, they're plenty big. And best example of that, I don't think I'm even going to need that close-up camera, is a piece of quarter sawn oak. This is, beautiful figure. Right? Okay, I will. You done with that one? Yeah. So beautiful figure that's caused by the structure of the grain. Okay, let's see if this works. Oh, there it is. Right. So those are, what you're seeing here, those big wide areas of figure are the flat sides of the cards, flat sides of the ray cells. And when you look at a piece of white oak, I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we'll try it. Because I've cut this piece of wood in different ways. So let's put this in here and see what happens, okay? That show up? Okay, so same piece of wood. Obviously, on that side, the ray cells are there, but they look different than the same cells to the right, depending on how the wood has been cut. So the closer you, I don't know if you can see, I couldn't hold the end onto the camera right here, but this is a pretty nice piece of quarter sawn wood because the growth rings are virtually absolutely vertical. So all wood that's called quarter sawn doesn't necessarily have 90-degree growth rings to it. It's a range, and I can't remember. It depends what the lumber graders make it, but let's say it's something like 80 degrees to 90 degrees, something like that. Yeah. And so depending on how close the rings are to vertical, you get broader ray cell patterns or less broad ray cell patterns. And sometimes you can actually, that's why if I was talking about cutting this piece so the saw blade was exactly following the ray cells. That way you can make spectacular quarter sawn wood yourself. Okay. So it said all woods have ray cells in them. I'm going to put this baseball bat over here. Oh wait, that's and turn it to this surface right here. So what do you see facing up? This is a piece of soft maple. Those are ray cells. So maple has ray cells in it. If you hit it just right, you're never going to see this in plain sawn wood. You might see it on the edge of something, or if you saw up a piece. It appears on this piece of wood because when I turn this, into an octagon, I got virtually every kind of cut, if that makes sense, as it went around the octagon. And one of them just happened to end up, I don't know if you probably can't tell it, going almost directly vertical right here. So you can manufacture that kind of wood. It's almost impossible to buy like quarter sawn maple. I mean, good luck with that. I suppose it exists out there somewhere. But the neat thing is that, cherry, for instance, is another wood where if it's cut just right, you can get a quarter sawn face to something. And that's a different kind of figure to work with when you're designing something. Because what you can sometimes do, which this is sound kind of crazy, but probably didn't notice this. Does this make any sense at all that edge has quarter sawn figure on it? Could you see the quarter sawn flakes on here? So how is that even possible? Yeah, who said that? Glue, that's right. This is just a little veneer.
That's glued on there. Right, so you can fake it, so to speak. So it's not natural. It looks great, but it's not natural if that really matters. So you can make your own figure if you understand how grain works. Boy, I think I'm going to leave it right about there, because that's tying the two together again. You know, you just don't have to work with what you're given. Edges can be changed, figure can be, grain can be changed if you're chasing a certain kind of figure. Whew. Then the last kind of figure I just want to briefly talk about, because I can't get past this, is, oh, let's put this board up here, just as the last example. So, what kind of figure? Can you make it out? It goes from dark to light to dark to light. My very last drawing. Thank God. So here is that board in, looking at an edge of it. So this is called curly figure usually. I think wavy would be a better descriptor, but curly is usually the word used. So I don't know if you saw that piece of wood that you guys were passing around earlier, but let's put this piece under the magnifying glass here. That doesn't really show it. Oh, there we go. So the grain of this curly wood is going like this, waving back and forth, and not just in one direction. It's going this way and that way, both snaking around. And what that results in here is that, to get back to Charlie's point about the way light hits a surface and bounces back at you in a different way, on a curly piece, the cool effect that you get as you walk around a curly piece is that the light places change to dark and the dark places change to light, right? Well, that's because the light is reflecting differently off cells that are rising and cells that are falling. So it keeps changing in these bands. And that's pretty neat stuff when you get it, right? Curly figure. Here is some more examples of it. We've all seen curly maple, like this, right? Much prized for instruments. This is a little more subtle, but here's a piece of curly walnut. So as far as I can tell, all species of wood occasionally will yield curly boards. And sometimes it's just one part of the tree, not the entire tree. And the way to spot it in the rough is to look for these light, dark, light, dark, light, dark changes on a surface of a board. And that usually indicates you're looking at something special. Yes, sir?
What is fiddleback?
That's a variation of curly wood, I believe. What is fiddleback wood? So that's, yes, it looks like that. Fiddleback, so-called because it's used in fiddles, violin making, things like that. It's usually curly soft maple, not hard maple. So there's all kinds of variations of wood figure. Some of the mahoganies, for instance, go crazy. Yes?
So bird's eye maple is a form of that chitoyancy.
Bird's eye maple is, the grain in bird's eye maple is also doing some pretty bizarre things, because they're all, think of them as little branchlets that never go anywhere.
And does it occur in other species?
I've not seen it in anything other than maple, but every species has its weird oddities in it. And yeah. There's one other piece of wood I want to put on the board here. Let's see if this actually works. This thing. This is a piece of white pine. So, can you see the odd look to that thing? That is quarter sawn. And what you're seeing are the broad sides of the ray cells. And if I hold this to the light, the neat thing is it's just plain old white pine. But cut just right, those ray cells reflect light back to you like mirrors. And this whole surface, the smoother it gets, it doesn't look like ordinary pine anymore. It looks like something really special. If you want to see this closer, I'll just leave this up here.
Tom, is that what vertical grain Douglas fir is too?
I don't know that the ray cells are the same in every species of every softwood. So would that happen in Doug fir? I don't know. But I've seen it often in pine. Even pine you buy at a big box store, if you cut it just right, has these magical qualities to it. It's amazing what you can do with with ordinary wood sometimes, just depending on how you treat it. And it's not a finished thing, it's a cut thing. Okay, whew, I think I've run out of gas. I hope that was interesting, guys. Hope you learned something, even though I said, thanks. So I hope we can meet again at some point and talk about grain direction, because that is a hot topic, and I don't think the Guild has ever had a meeting about that before. So see you again.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Oh, thanks, Brad. Good questions.
So I don't